Whitney Houston was right in the middle of "I Wanna Dance with Somebody" when she suddenly stopped. 20,000 people filling Madison Square Garden looked at each other in confusion. On that cold evening of March 15, 1993, one of the most powerful voices in music history had stopped her concert at the peak of her career. Whitney raised her hand, silenced the orchestra, and pointed to the back of the venue. Approaching the microphone with a trembling voice, she said, "Wait, I see an angel back there, but she's too far away." While security guards stood frozen, not knowing what to do, Whitney stepped down from the stage and began walking through the crowd toward the back. 11-year-old Sarah Mitchell, in her wheelchair, covered her face with her hands as tears streamed down, seeing Whitney Houston walking toward her. That moment was about to become a miracle that would change not just Sarah's life, but the lives of everyone present at Madison Square Garden that night. But no one knew that Whitney Houston, with the decision she made that night, was about to experience the most meaningful moment of her music career and change a child's destiny forever. If this story is going to touch you deeply too, now is the time. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel, because this isn't just a concert story, it's a real miracle story. And believe me, when you learn what Sarah experienced with Whitney, you won't be able to hold back your tears. Turn on notifications so you don't miss touching stories like this. Now if you're ready, let's go to that unforgettable night at Madison Square Garden. The anniversary of tragedy. Sarah Mitchell's story had begun exactly 1 year earlier, on March 15, 1992. The Mitchell family was returning home from their church choir in New Jersey when they had a horrific accident on Route 80. A truck coming from the opposite lane lost control on the icy road and crashed into the minivan carrying the family. Sarah's mother, Jennifer Mitchell, died instantly from the impact. Her father, Robert Mitchell, passed away in the ambulance. 10-year-old Sarah had miraculously survived, but due to spinal damage, she was paralyzed from the waist down. The doctors hadn't given the family much hope that first night. Dr. Marcus Thompson, the trauma specialist at Newark Beth Israel Hospital, would describe that night years later. "When I first saw Sarah, I thought her chance of survival was maybe 10%. But that little girl showed an incredible will to live. It was as if an invisible force was giving her the strength to hold on." The secret behind Sarah's survival was the Whitney Houston songs her Aunt Linda Patterson constantly played for her. During the 3 months she spent in intensive care, Linda sat by her niece's bedside every day playing Whitney Houston on a Walkman. The nurses noticed that Sarah's heart rate would normalize, especially when "I Will Always Love You" played. Head nurse Patricia Coleman's notes included these lines: "It can't be explained medically, but Sarah's vital signs improve when Whitney Houston songs play. It's as if the music is a life source for her." After leaving the hospital, Sarah was placed in the care of her Aunt Linda. Linda Patterson was 43 years old, never married, a teacher struggling to meet Sarah's needs on her modest salary. The wheelchair, physical therapy sessions, special education classes, the debts were mounting. But Linda did everything to make her niece happy. As Sarah's 11th birthday approached, Linda used her last savings to buy 2 tickets to Whitney Houston's Madison Square Garden concert. The tickets were in the very back row. Seeing the stage would be nearly impossible, but Linda thought just being in the same space as Sarah's hero would do her good. A star walking toward her destiny. On the evening of March 15, 1993, Linda and Sarah arrived at Madison Square Garden 3 hours before the concert. They were let in through the disabled entrance and placed in the very back row behind the security barriers. Sarah's eyes sparkled. It was her first time at such a big concert. The crowd around her, the lights, the music sounds all seemed like a magical world to her. But it was really difficult to see the stage from their seats. When the people in front stood up, Sarah couldn't see anything. Before Whitney Houston went on stage that evening, she was watching the audience from behind the curtain, as she always did. It was her concentration ritual. She would feel the energy of thousands of people, connect with them. That's when her eyes caught Sarah, the little girl in the wheelchair at the very back of the venue, behind everyone else, had caught her attention. Robin Crawford, who had been Whitney's assistant for many years, would describe that moment. Whitney suddenly stopped, pointed to the back through the curtain gap and said, "Who is that child?" I explained the situation to her, told her she was sitting in the disabled section. The expression on Whitney's face changed. It was as if something inside her had broken. Whitney went on stage and started the concert. She sang the first 3 songs, but her mind was always on that little girl. When the 4th song, "I Wanna Dance with Somebody," began, Whitney couldn't take it anymore. She stopped in the middle of the song, raised her hand, and silenced the orchestra. While 20,000 people at Madison Square Garden tried to understand what was happening, Whitney approached the microphone and began to speak. "There's an angel back there. Too far away she can't even see me. This isn't right. Bring that angel here." The miracle moment. While security guards hesitated, Whitney came down from the stage. Ignoring protocol rules, she began to move through the crowd. People were stepping aside in amazement, wondering where Whitney Houston was going. Sarah couldn't believe it when she saw Whitney coming toward her. She covered her face with her hands, trembling with excitement. When Whitney reached Sarah, she bent down and gently pulled her hands away from her face. "Why are you crying, sweetheart?" she asked. Sarah was too excited to answer. Aunt Linda explained, trembling. Her family died in a car accident last year. Sarah was paralyzed in that accident. Today is the anniversary of the accident. Your songs kept her connected to life, Miss Houston. Whitney's eyes filled with tears. Turning to Sarah, she asked, "What's your name, sweetie?" "Sarah Mitchell," the little girl whispered. Whitney stood up and turned to the security chief. "Bring this child to the stage." Now the security chief tried to object, but Whitney's gaze was determined. Whitney picked up Sarah in her arms. She felt how light the little girl was, and her heart ached. She began walking toward the stage, carrying Sarah in her arms. 20,000 people at Madison Square Garden stood up. The hall was thundering with applause. Many people were crying. When Whitney got on stage, she placed Sarah in a special chair next to the piano. She took the microphone and began to speak. "Lives. Change tonight is a special night," Whitney said, her voice trembling, "because we have a real warrior among us. Sarah Mitchell, 11 years old. She's lost her family, become paralyzed, but managed to hold on to life. I bow with respect before this courage." Whitney went to Sarah, held her hand, and turned to the orchestra conductor. "We're changing the program. Tonight I'm singing for Sarah." For the next 90 minutes, Whitney Houston gave perhaps the most emotional performance of her career. Between each song she would go to Sarah, talk to her, sometimes hold her hand, sometimes stroke her hair. While singing "I Will Always Love You," she sat next to Sarah and sang the song looking at her. The hall was drowning in tears. The cameramen were crying. The orchestra members could barely play their instruments. In the middle of the concert, Whitney stopped and extended the microphone to Sarah. "Will you sing with me?" she asked. Sarah nodded shyly. Whitney started "Greatest Love of All" and whispered the lyrics in Sarah's ear. Sarah's voice, though trembling, began to accompany Whitney. 20,000 people listened in silence. When the song ended, the hall gave a standing ovation for minutes. The decision backstage. When the concert ended, Whitney invited Sarah and Linda backstage. Sitting in the dressing room, Whitney began asking Linda questions. She wanted to know everything about Sarah's condition, treatment costs, living conditions. As Linda tearfully explained the financial difficulties, Whitney listened silently. Then she called her manager John Houston and said she wanted to have a special meeting. Whitney made a very important decision that night. She would cover all of Sarah's treatment costs, education expenses, and living costs. But she didn't want anyone to know about it. Only Linda and Sarah would know. Whitney called her lawyer and requested that a special fund be established. Under the name Sarah Mitchell Education and Treatment Fund, all of Sarah's needs would be met until she became an adult. The next day, Whitney invited Sarah and Linda to breakfast at the hotel. In the Plaza Hotel's private dining room, there were just the 3 of them. Whitney said she wanted to give Sarah a special gift and handed her a small box. When Sarah opened the box, inside was a miniature copy of one of Whitney's own Grammy Awards. It read, "To the real hero, Sarah Mitchell. For your courage, Whitney Houston. Secret donation and transformation." Whitney Houston kept her promise. Sarah's treatment costs began to be paid quietly. The best physical therapy specialists were hired. Experts were brought from Johns Hopkins Hospital. A special treatment room was set up in Sarah's home. Money was regularly deposited into Linda's bank account every month. But Whitney had made one condition. The source of this help would never be revealed. Sarah's life had completely changed. She was going to school in a special vehicle. She was taking lessons from the best teachers. She had started taking music lessons. On Whitney's recommendation, she was learning to play piano. She received letters from Whitney every month. In these letters, Whitney encouraged her, told her to follow her dreams. During Whitney's tours, no matter what city she was in, she would call Sarah, sometimes at midnight, sometimes in the early morning hours. Sarah's voice had become a source of comfort for Whitney. During the storms in her own life, her problems with Bobby Brown, her struggle with substance addiction, talking to Sarah gave her strength. Sarah's innocence, her joy of life, reminded Whitney how small her own problems were. Unexpected development. In 1995, 2 years after the concert, Sarah's doctors gave amazing news. Thanks to a new treatment method, there was a chance Sarah could walk. With an experimental surgery and intensive physical therapy, she could gain partial mobility. But the surgery was very risky and would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. As soon as Whitney heard the news, she took action. She arranged for the best surgeons at Mayo Clinic. She covered all the surgery costs. On the day of surgery, June 14, 1995, Whitney canceled her concert and went to Rochester. She was there when Sarah went into surgery. She waited at the hospital during the 8-hour surgery. When the doctors said the surgery was successful, Whitney cried uncontrollably in the hospital corridor. Robin Crawford described that moment. "I had never seen Whitney like that. She was crying as if her own child had come out of surgery." Sarah's recovery process was long and difficult. Months of physical therapy, painful exercises, falls, getting back up. But Whitney was with her every step of the way, on the phone, in letters, sometimes with surprise visits. The day Sarah took her first step, December 8, 1995, Whitney happened to be there. She had made a surprise visit to New Jersey. Whitney was holding her hand while Sarah tried to walk on the parallel bars. When she took her first independent step, they both cried. Media discovery. In 1996, 3 years after the concert, a journalist accidentally discovered the story. Jennifer Brooks, a reporter from the Newark Star-Ledger, was at Sarah's school for a routine story. When she saw Sarah walking in the hallway, she became curious about her story. When the school principal casually mentioned that Sarah had a special bond with Whitney Houston, the journalist began investigating. Whitney tried hard to prevent the story from being published. Her lawyers met with the newspaper, but Brooks was persistent. Finally, Whitney agreed to an interview with one condition. Sarah's identity would be kept secret. Her photo wouldn't be published. In the interview published on December 15, 1996, Whitney said, "Sarah taught me the real meaning of life. Fame, money, success are all temporary. But touching a life, changing a child's future, is real happiness. Sarah is my angel. I thought I was helping her, but actually she saved me." Graduation and pride. In 2000, Sarah was approaching high school graduation. She could now walk with assistive devices and was living a normal life. She had received a full scholarship from Columbia University. She would study music and psychology. The graduation ceremony would be on June 18, 2000. Sarah had invited Whitney, but Whitney had a busy schedule. On graduation day, when Sarah went on stage, there was a stir in the hall. A familiar voice was heard from the back. "I'm proud of you, Sarah." Whitney Houston was in the hall. She had come without telling anyone. When Sarah received her diploma, Whitney stood up and applauded. After the ceremony, the photo of Whitney hugging Sarah appeared in all the newspapers the next day. In her speech, Sarah said, "7 years ago, on the darkest day of my life, an angel appeared. That angel taught me not just how to walk, but how to live again." Whitney Houston doesn't just have the most beautiful voice in the world, she also has the most beautiful heart in the world. No matter how much I thank her, it's not enough. The hall gave a standing ovation for minutes. Roles reversed. In the early 2000s, Whitney's life entered a turbulent period. Her marriage to Bobby Brown was deteriorating. Her struggle with substance addiction was getting harder. In 2002, her disheveled appearance in the Diane Sawyer interview shocked the whole world. It was during this period that the roles reversed. Now Sarah was trying to support Whitney. Sarah, after receiving her psychology degree from Columbia, had specialized in addiction counseling. She called Whitney repeatedly, offered help. But Whitney was ashamed. Being dependent on the little girl she once saved hurt her deeply. In 2005, Sarah succeeded in getting Whitney admitted to a rehabilitation center. She was there every day during that process. Sarah got married in 2009. At her wedding, Whitney wanted to sing, but her voice wasn't what it used to be. Still, she sang, "I Will Always Love You," for Sarah. The hall was drowning in tears. Even though Whitney's voice was broken, the emotional intensity was incredible. Sarah's husband David Anderson would later say that the song Whitney sang was the most emotional performance he had ever heard in his life. Last meeting, January 11, 2012, exactly 1 month before Whitney Houston's death, Sarah and Whitney met in New York. Whitney was preparing for Clive Davis's party. Sarah announced she was pregnant. She said she would name the baby Whitney. Whitney cried, "After all these years, I still have tears," she said. "You became my miracle, Sarah. Now you're creating your own miracle." Whitney's last words to Sarah at that meeting were, "Don't forget me, Sarah. No matter what happens, wherever I am, I'll always be with you. You're the most beautiful thing I've left my mark on in this world." Sarah would later say that when Whitney said these words, she felt as if she was saying goodbye. When the news of Whitney Houston's death came on February 11, 2012, Sarah was devastated. She was 7 months pregnant, and doctors were afraid she would lose the baby. She wanted to speak at the funeral, but couldn't. She just cried silently at Whitney's casket. In her hand was the miniature Grammy Award Whitney had given her years ago. Legacy and Continuing Miracle. On May 15, 2012, Sarah's daughter was born. Her name was Whitney Sarah Anderson. After the birth, Sarah made a statement to the press. "Whitney Houston gave me a second chance at life. Now I'll keep this legacy alive by giving my daughter her name." Whitney wasn't just a magnificent voice, she was a magnificent person. The good deeds she did will be more lasting than the songs she sang. Sarah is now 39 years old and works at a rehabilitation center in New Jersey. This center, which she named the Whitney Houston Hope Center, provides free treatment to young people struggling with substance addiction. At the entrance of the center is a photo of Whitney, and underneath these words, "True strength is lifting others up." Sarah's daughter Whitney is now 12 years old and knows her mother's story. She listens to the songs of Whitney Houston, who took the place of her grandmother. She takes music lessons at school, and her teacher says she has an extraordinary voice. Perhaps Whitney Houston's legacy will be reborn in little Whitney's voice. Secret Letters and Confessions. In 2015, 3 years after Whitney Houston's death, Sarah received an unexpected package. Inside were 23 letters written in Whitney's handwriting. Whitney had written these over the years but never sent them. Pat Houston had finally delivered these letters that Whitney had requested in her will to be given to Sarah. One of the letters read, "Dear little Sarah, I won't send you this letter because I don't want you to see my weakness, but know that you are the purest light in my life. On my dark days, I think of you. When I took you in my arms that night at Madison Square Garden, I actually saved myself. You made me taste the feeling of motherhood, the mother I couldn't be to Bobby Christina. I tried to be to you. Forgive me." In another letter, Whitney had described her feelings on the day of Sarah's surgery. "While waiting in the hospital corridor, I prayed to God for the first time truly. I said, 'Save this child. Give whatever you want in return.' Maybe God heard me and took my voice in return. But it was worth it, Sarah. Seeing you walk was worth more than my biggest Grammy Award." Final words, an eternal bond. What happened that night at Madison Square Garden is recorded as one of the most emotional moments in music history. The moment Whitney Houston stopped her concert and reached out to Sarah wasn't just a helping hand, it was a lifeline. Two souls met in the universal language of music, between pain and hope. Sarah always says the same thing in her speeches today. People remember Whitney Houston for her voice, but I remember her for her heart. That night she didn't just give me a chance to go on stage, she gave me a chance to live. Every day when I wake up, I remember that chance she gave me, and work to give someone else the same chance. 12 years after Whitney Houston's death, the miracle she started continues in a chain. The hundreds of young people Sarah has treated, the lives Whitney indirectly touched. Perhaps this is true immortality. Even when your voice is silenced, the echo of the good deeds you've done continues. Of the 20,000 people who were at Madison Square Garden that night, and are still alive today, they still tell that moment with tears. The moment Whitney Houston left the stage and reached out to a little girl, took her in her arms and carried her to the stage, wasn't just a concert moment, it was one of the most beautiful examples of humanity. The music ended, the lights went out, but the miracle that happened that night continues. In every step Sarah takes, in every smile of her daughter Whitney, in every young person's new beginning coming out of the treatment center, Madison Square Garden still stands in the same place today. That stage, that piano, those seats. But the miracle that happened on March 15, 1993, carries a meaning that transcends the physical existence of the place. Security guard Marcus Johnson, one of the rare people who worked there that night, and is still alive today, goes to Madison Square Garden every March 15th to commemorate that moment. He shows new generation employees where Whitney Houston embraced little Sarah, and adds, "This is how real miracles happen. Quiet, unpretentious, but lasting forever." Whitney Houston's concert at Madison Square Garden transformed from just a night of hit songs into a life-changing story. And perhaps the most beautiful aspect of Whitney's legacy is this. Her voice that gave hope to millions may have been silenced, but the hope she gave Sarah Mitchell will live for generations. This is what a true artist is. One who illuminates not just the stage, but lives.